This is The Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the We Act Radio Network in Washington, D.C., and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
And welcome back to another edition of The Zero Hour. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and we have a very interesting show lined up for you today. I mean, I hope they're always interesting, but this is a special program. We have a special extended interview with Richard Trumka, head of the AFL-CIO. Richard Trumka had a lot of fascinating things to say. He's a very interesting leader trying to take the union movement in different directions. It was a great conversation. I think you'll enjoy it a lot. We also have a pre-recorded conversation with Marianne Williamson, also an extended interview. Marianne Williamson is a noted spiritual author and lecturer who is running for Congress in the 33rd California District. She also had a lot of interesting things to say, both thinkers and leaders with a different perspective on the world, which is the way we like to address the situations around us here on the Zero Hour. And then in the third hour, we'll be talking about the UC Santa Barbara tragedy with Cliff Schecter. We will be talking about the historic Houston Human Rights Ordinance with Maverick Welsh of the Houston GLBT Coalition, and we will be talking about the Patriotic Millionaires for fiscal strength. The 1% is worried too, folks. So we do have a terrific show, and just a couple comments before we launch into it. First of all, the pre-recorded interview with Richard Trumka covered a lot of topics, including new ways to define the union movement, new ways to reach new populations, and the new kind of struggle we have today. And I think people will find that of great interest. There is no way any longer to separate the union issue from the matters of inequality that plague us now. First of all, if you look at the economic data over the last 50, 60, 75 years, you see a very close correlation. The graphs track right together with one another, that when there is increased union membership, there's increased economic opportunity, increased social mobility, increased equality in economic terms. When union membership decreases, inequality increases. Now, what does this mean for a society as a whole? It means the middle class has trouble getting ahead or even continuing to exist. It means people have greater difficulty getting jobs. It means the minimum wage falls far behind productivity and becomes something people can't live on anymore. Our society can't sustain itself on inequality. And I think the conversation we had about inequality will interest you a great deal because Richard Trumka comes from a tradition based on activism, not just theory, and he has some interesting ideas about union activism in the 21st century. We talked a little bit about higher education. And increased access to higher education, and even alluded to the concept of free higher education, which I wholly support. In fact, I wrote a piece called Higher Education is a Human Right. Higher education in this country has become an unaffordable burden for the people who need it most, the people who can use education to get ahead in life. We need to do something about it. We need to do it quickly. Now, there's some proposals. The Obama administration did make things better in terms of student loans. Elizabeth Warren has some great proposals, which could help the situation quite a bit. Economist Amir Sufi, who was on our show last week and was co-authored the important book House of Debt, which I encourage you to read. Economist Amir Sufi has proposals similar to Elizabeth Warren's, but I think it's time to think in broader and more radical terms. When free higher education was made available to returning soldiers under the GI Bill, the GI Bill of post-World War II America, it had an enormous effect. It brought a lot of young men, and of course we have a gender-diversified military now, so it would involve young men and young women were happening today, but the GI Bill brought a lot of young men out of their poverty-ridden circumstances, out of their what we would have once called lower-class origins. Among them were my father and my uncle, who went to university on the GI Bill and made much better lives for themselves. Without it, who knows? I might not be here today. Many other people might say the same thing. It's time for a GI Bill for everyone. It's time to increase access to higher education. It's time where we should no longer think in terms of loans and debt of any kind. That's my radical proposal, not Elizabeth Warren's, not Amir Sufi's, but it's something that seems to interest the AFL-CIO and Richard Trumka. As I said in my piece, the barriers to higher education are an economic burden for students and society, and the research that I did myself shows that free higher education, we have the money for free higher education. But in the end, the fundamental argument I wrote isn't economic, it's moral. Social mobility in the U.S. is at or near its lowest point in modern history. That just can't change. That has to change. The cost of higher education is hitting lower incomes Americans the hardest. Think about the injustice of that. The people who need the help the most are getting worse and worse off as we cut back on programs that can help them. Younger Americans aren't as educated as the young citizens of many other developed countries. A lot of people don't know that. We actually have a less educated workforce coming into play now than most other developed countries, and better educated adults use more. Now, we can talk about what would happen if everyone had access to higher education, but I'm betting people could really address the inequality issue if that happened. So that's just one of many issues we touched on in a wide-ranging interview with AFL-CIO president, former president of the United Mine Workers, Richard Trumka. I think you'll enjoy the interview. We'll be right back with it after these messages. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour. And we are back on the Zero Hour, as promised, the first segment of our pre-recorded interview with Richard Trumka, president of the AFL-CIO. Before we were getting ready here, I was doing a little hard work myself, but building, I had the hammer and nails out. I was building something for the radio program, and you know what I forgot about hard work? Is that it's hard work.
Well, guess what? Saturday I did.
What'd you do?
I went up to my farm in Pennsylvania. I built 2 bridges that got washed out. I plowed, disked, fertilized, limed, and planted a bunch of places up there on my farm.
Well, then see, we already got to the first question I was going to ask you, which is when we're running around the world and doing all the things you got to do in your job, how do you stay connected with what it means to do manual labor? And I guess that's the answer to that, because, when you're sitting talking to somebody about how they want to cut Social Security or raise the retirement age, it's a good bet they've got a desk job and they're not driving nails or lifting lumber for a living all day, right?
Or working in a coal mine, or working on a building, or driving a bus, or doing anything that is manual like that, or where you're outdoors.
Or on their feet all day waiting tables, or you name it.
Absolutely.
So I guess that, and what that gets me to is, look, when I grew up, I suspect we're more or less the same age. When I grew up in Utica, New York, and there everybody in my neighborhood had a good working class union job. The dads could raise a family, and, both men and women, of course, should be free to work, but you could raise a decent family, live a nice lifestyle with one income, and you could get a public education, and you could, you could raise your kids. And I guess my question for you is, we got a lot of people here, the technical term is structural employment, but we got a lot of people basically saying those days are gone forever, everything about them. And I guess my opening question for you is, are those days gone forever?
Well, those days will be gone forever if we continue with the same austerity policies of the last 30 years. If we change those policies, those days can yet be in front of us. We can produce good jobs. You can produce jobs that will allow you to raise a family and actually achieve the American dream. They're doing it in Germany. They're doing it in Brazil. They're doing it in Australia. They're even doing it in Canada. It's a different set of policies. We have the austerity policies where they think you can cut your way into growing, which simply is not the case. And as long as we have those policies, they'll continue. Now, the most defining fact, economic fact of the past generation is that productivity has continued to go up and wages are flat. All of that money has literally been stolen from workers and gone to the top 1 or 2% because of the policies in this country, because of the attacks on collective bargaining and unionism, which helped share the benefits of those labors for generations and generations.
Well, that gets us to the issue of the day that everybody seems to be inequality. Now, sometimes I feel like inequality is like the weather. You know, they used to say everybody talks about it, nobody does anything about it. But inequality, the idea that the rich are getting richer and richer while everybody else, the people with jobs, the people looking for jobs, the people coming out of school are staying exactly where they were. Now, that whole idea, there's a side of the argument that says, well, that's just the way nature works. That's just the way the world works. And those 30 years or so that we had post-war America that we were just talking about, they're gone. And so I guess the answer, to it is number one, if they're not gone, if we can replicate some of the things we did in that post-war era, the other side of that argument that you hear people say is, unions, they're not relevant. You know, they were good for their day. They were good for that post-war era. But now it's all about outsourcing and robots and automation. And nowadays, you're going to have to get into the sharing economy and rent out your lawnmower in your second bedroom to get by because you're not going to be able to earn a decent living anymore. So, what's the relevance of unions nowadays? How do unions fit into the new world economy?
Well, if you look at all the economies that have really succeeded and continue to grow and continue to have rising medium wages for their citizens, you'll notice that there's always a high percentage of those workers that are unionized. Now, let's take our country, for instance. From 1946 to 1973, productivity in this country doubled, and so did wages. And the interesting thing about that period of time was the bottom two quartiles, the people in the bottom two quartiles, their incomes were raising faster than the people at the top, so the inequality and wage gap was closing. It's not by some stretch of the imagination. Workers were represented 35 to 40% in unions at that time. So we drove wages for entire sectors. And non-union people got raises when we got raises, when we got additional benefits. Non-union people got them as well. From 73 to date, that productivity has continued up, but wages have been flat because there was a concerted attack on workers, on unions, on our ability to collectively bargain. And so workers have lost power in this country. Multinational corporations have gained power. And look, if you buy the theory that it's a natural course of events, then you really don't believe much in the theory of democracy. Because in democracy, everybody should get a fair share of what they produce. And that's what's happening in countries like Germany and France and Italy and Brazil and Australia and Canada. Those countries, their workers are doing much better because a higher percentage of them are in collective bargaining. Now, you could increase the minimum wage to a living wage so that people would do better, but that sort of straitjackets the system if you take the wage up very, very high. But if you use collective bargaining, where the people at that entity that know the entity the best can sit down as equals and get a fair share of what they produce, then you get a great result. That's called the American dream. And unless you're willing to give up on the American dream, you have to say that can be achieved yet again in this country. That's what we're all about. Raising wages for workers, all workers, union and non-union workers, so that an economy that is 72% driven by consumer spending can have the power to grow and reward everybody.
Well, you're preaching to the converted on that one, and I couldn't agree with you more on every count. But Yeah, and you said something interesting there that I'd like to return to a little bit, which is raising wages for union and non-union workers as well. I think that there's a sense out there. A lot of people I talk to say, "Oh, well, unions are not going to help me," or yeah, you got to pay your dues. I don't get that much out of it, or I don't know anybody who's on a union job anymore. So, I mean, one of the things that I've observed, but tell me if I'm wrong, is it seems to me like the union movement is looking for and coming up with some ways to reach out to and help workers who are not necessarily in a union right now and maybe haven't even given it some thought. But by helping them, I guess the idea is you help the whole economy. Or I'm thinking, for example, of fast food workers.
Well, let's start with a couple of examples. First of all, at the front of every movement to raise the minimum wage has been the labor movement. That doesn't affect most of our members because our members make more than the minimum wage. But that's good for the country because it puts money in workers' pockets. That money creates demand. That demand creates jobs. So one way we do it is by raising the minimum wage. It's by bringing a minimum level of benefits from Social Security to Medicare and Medicaid to health care to every American that's out there. The labor movement was at the front of every single one of those fights. And if you look at it, what we're doing right now, we're partnering with a lot of groups on the outside, progressive groups, to raise the wages of all workers. The more we raise wages for everybody, the better off we are out there, whether they're union or non-union. And we're doing some pretty creative things. We're partnering with day laborers that are undocumented workers that hire out by the day. You see them standing on a corner somewhere. They get paid a day's wages sometimes. Sometimes they get cheated out of those wages. We're helping those undocumented workers get what's rightfully theirs so that they're not misclassified and get paid half of what they're rightfully due, or they don't have an employer that absconds. Domestic workers that have had a tough time because they're individually in each home. We're bringing them together. We've partnered with them. They're actually affiliated with the AFL-CIO. Car wash workers on the West Coast that couldn't get protective gloves to keep the chemicals from burning the skin off of their hands. We've stepped in. We filed claims for them. We helped them. They're affiliated with us. Taxi cab drivers in New York City that were predominantly immigrant workers were getting cheated out of what they were rightfully due. They're now part of us. We're working with that. So, RJ, we're experimenting with different types of workers to help workers. And, we're at the front of the fight to bring citizenship to 11 million undocumented workers in the United States. Why? Well, there's a couple of reasons for it. One, because it's morally the right thing to do. We as a country are a country of immigrants, and we shouldn't be letting this group of immigrants be mistreated and abused. Second of all, as long as they don't have the same rights as American workers, unscrupulous employers will use them to drive down the wages of every worker out there, union and non-union worker alike. And three, we found them to be a tremendous sense of innovation and hard work. Bringing them into the real economy would be good for the economy. All of those come together, so we have a record to be proud of. We're doing more to raise the wages of others than we've ever done before, and we'll continue doing that until every American gets a fair share, gets exactly what they're entitled to, gets paid for overtime, gets paid for all the work that they do, and their standard of living is rising. The other one, of course, you said, is fast food workers that are fed up with living under unbearable conditions, hot. They jerk them around on schedules so they can never plan a life. They move them in and out, and we're working with them to try to get a living wage. Or Walmart, trying to get a minimum of $25,000 for every Walmart worker out there. If we do that, every worker in this country will benefit.
And we won't be spending so much on assistance for them because they're not making enough to get by, and the government's got to step in. So I'm with you on that too. And I guess where it goes is it sounds like a different kind of not your father's union movement, if you will. I'm old and I come from a union family, but I also remember the days you used the word progressive, and since you already have an idea how old I am, I was one of those long-haired student demonstrators who was getting beaten up by George Meany's guys back in the Vietnam days. Well, I wasn't because I could run faster. I wasn't bigger, but I could run faster. But there was a day when the union movement and the whole idea of progressive, whatever word you want to use, populism is coming up now as a term, new populism, but whatever you want to call it, there was a day when the perception was you had your union card, you were in the union, you were on one side of the fence, everybody else was outside. And now it sounds like what you're saying is this is a broad set of alliances for everybody who works for a living, or that's something closer to that. Am I onto something? Am I getting close?
Let me go back and say this is back to the future, because let me take you back to my union. I came out of the United Mine Workers. I'm a third generation miner. We were formed in 1890. At our very first convention in 1890 in Columbus, we adopted a resolution in our convention, our Constitution, that said that it prohibited discrimination based on race, color, creed, or national origin. We elected 2 African American males to our first executive board, one from Tennessee and one from Wheeling, West Virginia. We never had a Jim Crow local in the mine workers. And so we're going back to those roots where we were part of the community and the community was part of us, where we weren't just raising wages for union members, but it was good for us to raise wages for the entire community so we could fund schools, so we could fund health care, so we could have old age pensions for everybody, like Social Security, which provides a minimum of benefits and securities for every American out there. We were at the front of those fights, and now that's where we're back to. We're inviting the communities to come in. In fact, 6 months before our last convention, which was September of last year, RJ, we invited progressive groups to come in and be part of our committees and said, look, there's a problem out there. Let's plan together. Let's educate together. Let's mobilize together. And let's try to correct it together. We brought them in. They were voting members of our committees. They were at our convention. They participated fully in the convention. And since then, we're planning together, mobilizing together, educating together, and reaching out to the community to say, look, none of the progressive groups out there are big enough to do it alone. But all of us together represent the vast majority of Americans. Let us stick together and create an economy that really does work for everyone, not just the top 1%.
Well, this kind of approach, it's very popular, as you well know, because you commissioned a lot of the polling that shows that people across the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, even Tea Partiers, agree with a lot of this agenda. It hasn't been galvanized or organized for them, and to that end, if I remember correctly, I mean that gets us to the whole issue of where uh, electoral politics fits in all this. And if I remember correctly, I read recently or heard recently that you were encouraging Elizabeth Warren to get into the presidential race. Is that true?
Well, I don't know that I encouraged Elizabeth. What I was asked about Elizabeth Warren and about the presidency, and I said she would be the prototype president, someone who really does care about people and has the strong enough convictions of her values to stay with them and fight for them after she got elected. I really admire Elizabeth because she didn't change one iota during her campaign or after her campaign. She said what she stood for on day one. She got elected on that, which it is great politics in this country, and then she fought for those same things. Now, the Supreme Court rulings that put the system awash in money can be addressed one of two ways. And I wrote an op-ed piece on this, RJ. Democrats and Republicans can go out and pan for money at the same trough. Or one of them can say, I'm going to stand for the values of working people and actually fight for them and watch people come to them. That's good electoral politics in this country because the vast majority of people believe that having a good job and a voice on the job and having Social Security and health care for everybody and the right to a vacation, the right to send your kid to college. Instead of us paying billions and billions of dollars in subsidies to corporation, we could be sending every kid in this country to college free, like they do in other countries. That's good politics. That makes sense. And that's the values that we stand for and the vast majority of Americans stand for. And we're going to continue to fight for those. I'm not ashamed of it. I make no excuses, and I will never make excuses for standing up for workers like that.
Well, I wrote a piece pointing on the economics of giving everybody free college education, which I'm all for. Remember the GI Bill. A lot of guys went to, and some women, it was mostly guys at that day, went to college on the GI Bill, and they contributed to the growth of the economy too. So I did a piece on the economics of it. We could pay for it if we closed tax loopholes, but I guess what we're up against is, and I'll admit I was wrong. I love Elizabeth Warren. I was wrong. I had to pay up because I said, she'll get in, she'll be a Democrat, she'll have to contend for money, just as you were saying, at the same corporate trough, she'll have to blunt her message, and man, was I wrong. And so I guess my question is, where do we find another dozen like her, and move electoral politics away from centrist, third way, going for corporate money that way, and hard right Republican going for money that way? How do we get? Where do unions fit into this? Where can the union movement help with this?
Well, first of all, there's more than just Elizabeth that are that same type of politician. Sherrod Brown's there, Jeff Markey. There are a number of people in the House and the Senate that have never, wavered from what they stood for. George Miller, for instance, but there were a number of them there. It's a small cadre that we really need to foster and to encourage and then defend. What we're doing is changing the way that we do politics, RJ. We used to get our political machine geared up 7-8 months before an election, and then on election night we'd go celebrate that we got someone elected. But we had no way to hold them accountable thereafter. Right now we're keeping our political mechanism in place so that the day after election day we start growing it to get it bigger each time, not killing it and then growing it back, killing it, growing it back. We're going to keep growing it, and we'll use that mechanism to hold people accountable. So that if in fact you say that you stand for workers, we're going to make sure you stand for workers. And if you don't, every one of your constituents are going to know. Not just union folks, but everybody out there. The other thing that we're doing, RJ, that I'm really excited about is we started a thing called Common Sense Economics. It's an analysis of how the policies of the last 30 years actually built this box around workers and around the country. And then it gives the policy prescriptions as a way out. And we worked with Jacob Hacker to work on those policy prescriptions. And they come in a couple of different buckets. One bucket is democracy itself. If we allow the top 1% to get stronger and stronger and stronger and spend unlimited amounts, there comes a tipping point where they will continue to make the rules and control the system forever. And that's not the way democracy was intended to be exercised. So one bucket is fighting for democracy, stopping these stupid rules that make it harder to vote and make it easier to vote. One thing that we'll be pushing for is universal registration. When you're born, you're registered, and you're registered for life. You don't have to jump through hoops every couple of years to be able to vote. The second thing is the actual policy descriptions, to get rid of the old austerity politics and neoliberalism that we've exported from this country for the last 30 years and has resulted in the fiascos that we've seen. The near meltdown of the economy and the 1% growing by leaps and bounds while everybody else is stagnant or even worse, going in the opposite direction. We're going to take that out. We're going to train trainers, workers, so that they can go talk to workers. union workers, non-union workers. Our goal is to talk to a couple of million non-union workers and give them that analysis and the policy prescriptions and continue to build on that and go down the ballot to local people, county commissioners, mayors, and have them have the same understanding of the economy so people begin to talk about what is possible with the economy, not what isn't possible. Because they have us believing right now that we really can't give an education to kids. We don't have the money. We can't do this. We don't have the money. Yet every time it comes time for multinationals or the banks or everybody else to get bailed out, we find the money. All we have to do is change a few loopholes. The territorial taxation system that allows hundreds of billions of dollars to escape, bring it back in, and you'll be able to give people good jobs, build good infrastructure, make the country more competitive in the process, and at the same time create a tax base that allows schools to prosper and communities to prosper.
Well, and they'll tell you that the corporations can't afford to repatriate those offshore taxes, even though their profits are at record levels. So that it all sounds good to me, but it brings up. I know you're pressed for time, but it brings up another question, which is you just got back from meeting with your colleagues from all around the world, and is there a tension there in that conversation between what you're doing for American workers and these lousy trade deals they keep trying to push on us, and maybe some of the other unions saying elsewhere in the world saying, well, we could use those jobs?
No, everybody understands that if the idea of a trade agreement is to steal jobs from the other partner, you're going to get your turn in the barrel. In fact, it was quite the opposite. I met and we did a long series of negotiations and meetings with the ETUC, the European Trade Union Congress, and we've agreed on a set of principles for the trade agreement between the U.S. And Europe. One of those principles is doing away with the investor-state dispute settlement mechanism that allows governments. It threatens the ability of governments to respond to public needs by placing private profit on the same level as the general welfare. It allows corporations and banks and other corporate investors to circumvent domestic, legislative, regulatory, and the judicial processes. We did that, but several other things we agreed to as well. We have this series of principles that we've agreed to. If that agreement doesn't have those principles in it, then trade union movements in Europe and the United States will oppose that treaty. And I think collectively we'll be able to defeat a treaty that is modeled on the old NAFTA model and all of those along the same line. So everybody understands what's out there and that these policies, the austerity policies, aren't working. I talked to workers from Greece.
Oh boy.
27% unemployment. Among youth, it's 40-some%. They keep cutting and cutting and cutting. Why are they doing that? They know it doesn't help. It's to placate the bond market. It's to have, so the world, WTO, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the IMF, our International Monetary Fund, and those organizations still have the old neoliberalism that says unless you cut and you do away with the social safety net and you lower the wages of your workers, we won't lend you the money. That's the fight that we're fighting right now, and we're doing it collectively. It doesn't, look, when we sign an agreement with Mexico, the Mexican workers aren't our enemy. They're trying to make a living just like we are. The enemy is the high investment people who take advantage of that to abuse workers on both sides of the border and lower the standard of living of people on both sides of the border. We want an agreement that raises the standard of living, and we're willing to fight for that.
That makes a lot of sense to me, particularly because well-paid American workers can buy imported goods better than poorly paid American workers. And in the end, if the deal is only designed to exploit those workers in other countries, nobody's going to win. We're going to have more Bangladesh disasters and all of that. So And the last question, I know you got to go, but last year I was just reading before this call the AFL-CIO annual report of death on the job. And what jumped out at me, we have 50,000 estimated deaths from occupational illness. We had something like 4,400 deaths on the job itself. We had 3,000 deaths in 9/11. And we changed the way we live because we said rightfully that every human life is sacred. What do we do to change the attitude that so many people, particularly on the business side, seem to have, which is, well, 4,300 isn't too bad, 50,000 isn't too bad. These are our mothers and fathers, our sisters and brothers, our neighbors. What do we do to get people to pay attention to those deaths?
Well, first of all, let me talk about my personal experience, RJ. Every male in my family has died from black lung, from the coal mine. Both my grandfathers, my dad, both of his brothers, several of my uncles, and several of my cousins have died from black lung. Now, we kill every day. 7 workers die from asbestosis. And here's the question that I asked politicians of all stripes, including the president, the administration. If terrorists were killing 7 workers every day in the United States, how many days would it be before the American public demanded action to stop it? There's no difference between a terrorist killing you and an occupational disease killing you. These are things that can be stopped. They die, people in this country die by ones and twos every day, and no one notices. It's only when you have a major disaster, a coal mine explodes and you have people trapped, that people say, oh, we have to do something about health and safety. It's a constant job to educate them, the American public, and mobilize them and get them sensitive to the fact that workers are dying every day instantly, and they're dying in pieces because of occupational diseases, and that is unacceptable. They are dying for profit. Profit can be put slightly aside, create safe working places that are more productive and create more profit in the long run for employers. But it's going to take all of us saying, every day, 2 workers just died. 1 worker died here. One construction worker fell. A truck driver died. Those are needless deaths that we have to make people understand and get rid of the desensitization that we've created in this country about workers dying in ones and twos like it's some act of God or it's part of the job. It doesn't have to be that way.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal right here. If someone in your shop can keep track of those, we'll speak their names every week, just like they do with the people who sacrifice their lives in combat. We will name them every week on this show.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll do it my best to identify those people and get the names in your hands on a regular basis, so that people out there will actually know that there's a face, there's a family. It's a mother, it's a dad, it's a brother, it's a sister, it's an aunt, it's an uncle, it's a neighbor, it's a friend. It is somebody whose life has just been terminated and their family has been cut short of the enjoyment of that family. That's what we have to do, make sure that it's not a statistic, but it's people that are dying. And we'll work with you every way we can. I appreciate the offer, and I take you up on it.
It's a deal. We got a deal. And with that, I know you've got a lot to do, so I will let you go with my great thanks, and I hope you'll join us again sometime, President Richard Trumka of the AFL-CIO.
RJ, you invite me back, and I'll be on. Good luck.
Thank you.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you, sir. And we will be right back after this on the Zero Hour.
This is the Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the WEACT Radio Network in Washington, D.C., and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
Welcome back to the second hour of the Zero Hour. In this segment, we're featuring an in-depth interview with Marianne Williamson, author, lecturer, and candidate for Congress. Marianne is running in California's 33rd District, where I live, in what is known as a jungle primary. That's California's new system where an assortment of candidates runs for a congressional seat outside the two-party structure. Although she's a lifelong Democrat, Marianne Williamson is running as an independent and is not accepting any institutional campaign contributions. Marianne Williamson first became known as a writer of spiritual books and as a lecturer on spiritual topics, but she has been writing about the political process since at least 1997, when she wrote a book called Healing the Soul of America. When it comes to thinking about politics in a broader and deeper context, I kind of think of her as a kindred spirit to the Zero Hour. Now Marianne's gotten a lot of coverage during this campaign, perhaps in part, at least initially, because of her celebrity associations. She's well known and well liked in that community, and that coverage has gotten increasingly favorable as the campaign goes on. But every reporter who writes about her for a mainstream paper somehow seems to feel obligated to dismiss her at the same time as a quote-unquote New Age guru. And yet, I find that what she has to say about spiritual politics fits very closely with the thoughts of Martin Luther King and of Reverend William Barber II of the NAACP, who set up the Moral Mondays campaign in North Carolina. So, in an age when more and more people are looking beyond the confines of traditional organized religion, should she be dismissed because her brand of spirituality is less traditional than theirs? I've talked to Marianne privately, and she has as good a command of the issues as any member of Congress I've met. Why should she be dismissed for her approach to the political process because it has a spiritual dimension? I think that kind of thinking should be celebrated. And apparently she's not completely marginalized because she's been endorsed by former Michigan Governor Jennifer Granholm. She's been endorsed by Representative Keith Ellison, co-chair of the Progressive House Caucus. Representative Alan Grayson has endorsed her, so has Dennis Kucinich, and a number of other leading progressive politicians. I think her framing of the political process is very interesting, and I think you'll find it interesting too. That's why we're speaking with her at length, not just about her campaign, but about what makes her tick, her heroes, her hopes, and her thinking. Now, I don't endorse candidates for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm just a guy with a radio show, a keyboard, and a job. So it feels kind of grandiose to do that. That's what political people do. Secondly, I think I'm better off focusing long term and not acting as an advocate for any political party or candidate. But I can tell you this. I live in Marianne's district, and I'm voting for her. There is another good progressive in the race, Ted Lieu, but I think our political process needs more leaders who are willing to challenge the assumptions under which our political debates are held. We need more elected officials like Elizabeth Warren. We need more leaders like the ones I named who have endorsed Marianne. Now, I'm not telling anybody how to vote because that's not my role in life, but no matter what your politics are, I think you'll find Marianne Williamson very interesting. If you live in the 33rd District, I would encourage you to consider her carefully when it comes time to pull the lever or mark the ballot. So I hope you'll listen. I think it's a very informative discussion, a great perspective on the political process. We'll be right back after this with our pre-recorded interview with Marianne Williamson. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. So, Marianne Williamson, writer, congressional candidate. Are you having fun yet?
I'm having fun and I'm having stress. It's both and.
And how would you say, you've been doing this for a while now. The last time we talked, it was very early in the process. Do you feel this process has changed you in any way, this process of running for office, or is changing you?
You see who you are, certainly. I've seen some of my best work. I've seen some of my greatest weaknesses surface as well.
Well, that's very honest. It's a very honest answer. And, you know, one of the things I've noticed is in your campaign, the coverage seems to, whenever reporters want to say nice things about you, your strengths as a candidate or your abilities or your viability or electability, they seem to often feel the need, my observation, to offset that with some disparaging remarks or a little bit of the caricaturing we talked about the last time we had a conversation as New Age guru or what have you. And yet here we are in your home, which seems to be beautifully decorated.
Thank you.
As far as I can tell, it's completely crystal free. I don't see any of that architecture. Maybe you hide it away, but I guess my question for you would be, what would you like people to know about you that maybe hasn't been reported? How would you like people to see you?
Well, first of all, I think that trivialization, New Age guru stuff, has not so much been there over the last 3 months, not serious journalists. I think it now says more about the journalist than it does about me when anybody pulls that old, tired minimization out of their pocket. I think the serious commentators on this race recognize what's really going on here. And I think that, most importantly, the voters of District 33 have seen through that ruse. Because the conversation about a more integrative approach to life, the larger non-denominational spirituality, enlightenment conversation, it's not fringe anymore. I mean, you have, Harvard University has symposiums on integrative medicine now. The most, prestigious business schools have symposiums on integrative approaches to business. So now you're the one who looks silly if you just out of hand dismiss anyone who's talking about us as anything other than a mechanistic model. So I'm not really complaining. I think serious journalists have, more recently, as we have achieved more of a substantive support in the community, I'm not complaining about the way I've been treated.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. And speaking, by the way, of the spiritual dimension of the political process, I heard Reverend William Barber speak recently. You know Reverend Barber,
yes.
NAACP Moral Mondays in North Carolina. And he talked about the prophetic moral vision in politics. Right. He said the prophetic moral vision seeks to penetrate despair so that new futures can be believed and embraced by us. He said imagination must come before, I thought I was listening to you actually. He said imagination must come before implementation. There must be people who keep alive the vocation of imagination and conjure up alternative visions. So I guess my question for you is, how do you feel about the idea of prophetic moral vision in politics, or for that matter, spiritual leadership in politics?
Well, obviously, I feel strongly about it, or I wouldn't be running. The point is, if a Protestant minister says it, it's considered this prophetic paragraph, and if someone like myself says it, it's too often seen as New Age gobbledygook. And that bears mentioning.
Well, he's a big hero of mine, and I think of a lot of people's, and I think that what your comment speaks to a little bit is the marginalization. An increasing number of people in this country have non-traditional spiritual beliefs.
Exactly. So if you have minister in front of your name, or rabbi in front of your name, or priest in front of your name, you're given a permission. Once again, it's passing away.
Yeah, let's hope. So, anything else about you that you'd like people to know? Anything about your life experience that's formed your political view, whether it's...
The only thing I think that I would hope that people realize now, it's not like one morning I woke up and said, oh, I'm going to run for office. I founded Project Angel Food. I'm on the board of Results, which is an anti-hunger and anti-poverty lobbying organization. I co-founded the Peace Alliance. I've long been a political and nonprofit activist, and I've long been speaking about these topics. My book, Healing of America, talking about corporatism, talking about money in politics, talking about conscience and its role that should be in there in politics, talking about Dr. King, talking about Mahatma Gandhi. That book was published in 1997. So this is not like something I'm new to.
Well, and I will confess to you that when I interviewed you last time and when I met you, I had not read that book. But I did go back and read it, and a couple things jumped out at me. You wrote in 1997, as you said, there are those in America today who seem to distrust the mechanics of liberty. Democracy is indeed a radical proposition. This is you. It is posited on the notion that each of us, from the depths of our own wisdom, brings to society the unique and precious gift of our own viewpoint and experience, which I thought was pretty prophetic, as you noted. But then you said this. You followed that by saying, we do not and will not always see things the same way. That is not a bad thing, but a good thing. This is Marianne Williamson, 1997. So how does that play out if you go to Congress and you have to sit down and cut a deal with Michelle Bachmann?
Well, look, if Michelle Bachmann, of course, she's not running this time, so I wouldn't be cutting a deal with Michelle Bachmann.
Granted,
but anybody who is a sitting representative was elected by their constituents. And I honor that. They have every bit as much right to be there as I. And politics is an art of compromise. You know, you don't compromise with your vision, but you do compromise with your politics. That is the job. And I think it shows a disrespect for our system of government if you don't recognize that. I also remember Martin Luther King's line that you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. So I would not be sauntering into Congress with this, you know, superior view that somehow I know and they don't. That's the problem in America. The problem is all these pointed fingers. So I would approach my colleagues with respect, knowing that they were elected by their constituents just as I was elected by mine, and hopefully we could have some synergy rather than just opposition. You know, President Eisenhower said the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. And I think that's true. I think that there are high-minded conservative values focusing mainly on personal responsibility, and there are high-minded liberal values focus more on public responsibility. I think both are true. I'm definitely a left-leaning person, but I recognize high-minded conservative values. The point is, so much of the game in Washington today isn't about either one, really. And the real dichotomy today, more often than not, is about economic versus humanitarian values. And so I would be trying to foster a new conversation that more has to do with introducing into the conversation the things that I think matter most, that I think too often are not spoken about in Congress, that really has to do with the re-democratization of the United States at a time when, according to the paper recently released by Princeton University, we are not currently functioning as a democracy. We're functioning as an oligarchy, a small political and financial elite that's our basic influencers of American policy. That's what I want to talk about. This isn't just a matter of arguing with conservatives. This is a matter of shouting from the rooftops so that everybody can hear.
So how would that work in practice? In other words, tell us what your first month in Congress would be like.
Right.
You get there, I guess you
Right.
find your desk, your office,
Right.
the nearest restroom, and you start to meet your colleagues on both sides of the aisle.
Right.
How do you envision that?
Right. Well, first of all, as you know, Congressman Alan Grayson, who's long been a hero of mine, has endorsed my candidacy. He came out here to campaign. Congressman Keith Ellison, who is a co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, has endorsed my candidacy. I'm a big fan of Barbara Lee. I'm a big fan of Bernie Sanders. So I would definitely be interested in working with people who I would see in many ways as my mentors. You know, what's going on? Fill me in. How can I help? What is the vision that I came here to help articulate so that its force could be magnified? Now, in terms of some of the people whose politics I would not necessarily agree with, there are two issues. First of all, you want to find the areas in which you do agree, and not always focus on the areas in which you do not agree, right? Take something like animal rights. You know, the puppy mills and the cockfighting and the factory farming. There are a lot of people, a lot of Christian conservatives, because their biblical sensibility is that God has told humanity to steward well, to be good stewards of the animals. So, and also a lot of the conservative Christians have been very active in the sex trafficking now. So there are a lot of issues where I would not necessarily agree with someone on this, but I would agree with them on that. or at least there might be an area where we could seek to work together. And I think there are many people in Congress who would look at me that way as well. I wouldn't agree with her about this, but let's talk to her about that. Also, Richard, when people ask me, what would be your first act? I would be there to listen a lot at the beginning. I would be there to observe a lot at the beginning. I don't think you're empowered in any situation where your first thing is to shout off your ideas. I think in any situation, power lies in observation and listening and really seeking to find yourself personally in human relationships. It shows some humility that I think attracts goodwill.
Good. Now, you've told me a little bit about the people in Congress that which was actually going to be a question of mine, who do you feel an affinity for, who can you see yourself drawn to? What about in life? Who are your heroes? Who, either growing up or now, or, who do you admire? And
well, as you know from reading Healing of America, I look at Gandhi, I look at Martin Luther King, I also look at Bobby Kennedy, like real heroes in many ways of their articulation of politics. Everybody has their own favorite founder. Thomas Jefferson is a real, I've read every biography, certainly not to excuse the fact that he was a slave owner.
Well, that's a good start.
Dennis Kucinich is someone who has been he has endorsed the campaign. He's been very helpful to me. I have a lot of respect and admiration for Lawrence Lessig, a lot of respect and admiration for Robert Reich. Eva Longoria has endorsed my campaign. Jennifer Granholm. Debbie Stabenow is a friend of mine. I'm not saying she's endorsed the campaign, but I have people like that who I know, who are friends, who are in politics, who I would who I look to now. To ask for advice and opinion and counsel, and would only step that up once elected.
Fair enough. You mentioned the process of running. You've said kind things about your opponents by and large. I mean, I haven't heard you say an unkind word. If you have, I missed it. And that's one of the things, I think, one of the ways in which I gather you're trying to embody a different kind of political process. But given that, what do you think you bring to the political conversation, both as a candidate and potentially as a representative, that they don't?
What I bring is a willingness to name what's really going on and to put it down on the table and just stop pussyfooting around what's happening in this country. That's what I bring. Instead of just addressing the effects, we need to name the cause. Instead of just treating the symptoms, we need to name the disease. The disease is the fact that we've become a legalized system of bribery and corruption. Can we say this now? Can we get out of our national denial? It's very important that we do so because you can't claim a solution in life until first you name the problem. You can't know what medicine to take until first you name your disease. People who are establishment candidates are stuck in this paradigm where you can't quite get down and say it, whether they know it or not, and they just might, because I think many people do. But if you're stuck within that party machinery, because the parties themselves are so beholden to that money in order to get elected and stay elected. And that's why I think independent candidacies are so important. Richard, I've been a Democrat all my life, and I would caucus with the Democrats. I have the heart of it, I feel, of a Democrat, but it's the Democratic Party of Bobby Kennedy. It's the Democratic Party of Paul Wellstone. It's the Democratic Party of Eugene McCarthy. Everything has moved in such a corporatist direction right now. Both and I'm not saying that the parties are the same. I do not feel that they are. However, there is a deep, sinister story here about the places where they are, because they are both beholden to those same financial forces. And I think there are very wonderful people in Washington who are as upset about this as I. But I'm sorry, I'm a student of history. Political parties are not mentioned in the Declaration, they're not mentioned in the Constitution, and George Washington warned us against them in his farewell address. Abolition was a people's movement, women's suffrage was a people's movement, civil rights was a people's movement. The political parties come in later. What's happening now is that the tail is wagging the dog. The political parties should be serving the will of the people. The people shouldn't feel like we have to serve the will of the parties. So I just feel I can just lay it down and say it the way I really think it, and the way my constituents see it, much more freely. You know, harder for me to get elected as an independent, but so much more I can do for people if once I get there. Just say it. Nobody's going to be telling me to sit down, shut up, wait my turn, go on this show, don't go on that show. This is how we're playing it. No. I have a relationship with the constituents of District 33, and this is what we think.
Let's try something completely different. You have a lot of celebrity supporters. I mean, a lot, you know, Jane Lynch, Steven Tyler, Chaka Khan, I'm leaving, I always get her name wrong, I always call her Frances Farmer.
Frances Fisher.
Frances Fisher. What do you think the role of celebrities in politics should be?
Well, it's not the issue of the role of celebrities, Richard, it's the role of citizens. Every citizen should be involved. And remember, if you're in a district, which is the west side of Los Angeles, that's like saying, should people in the oil business be involved in politics in Texas? That's where they live. So when you're talking about someone like an Alanis Morissette, she lives in the district. And I think that the vast majority of the celebrity support is from people who live in the district. They are supporting the candidate of their choice. Frances Fisher is my closest girlfriend. So, you know, having a close friend who's an actor or an actress in Los Angeles is like, well, hello, this is where people live. I admire anybody who puts their voice out there. A celebrity no more, but no less than anybody else. And by the way, I don't think that Wendy Girl lacks celebrity support.
Oh, no, I'm sure she doesn't, but, you know, just the whole issue. It's funny how so many people who complain about celebrities in politics don't complain about money in politics.
I know, it's crazy. And once again, they're Americans too.
Right.
When people say they should keep their mouth shut, nobody should keep their mouth shut. I mean, this whole idea of a political class is part of what this campaign repudiates. That's the same voice that would say, who was I to run? Excuse me, no American should be shamed for running, and no American should be shamed for using their voice.
You know, somebody, I think it was you, reminded me that Congress was originally supposed to be farmers and...
The founders called it the People's House. They thought it would be the farmer for a while, the shopkeeper for a while, the candle maker for a while, and that's what it should be today. It should be the stay-at-home parent for a while. It should be the teacher for a while. It should be the activist for a while. It should be the student for a while. It should be the yoga teacher for a while. It should be people. I mean, that's part of the profundity of the framers' vision, that half of Congress would be people.
Right. The House was supposed to be the people's house.
That's right, and that's a large part of the message of this campaign. There's a people's lockout. The average person is locked out of what I see as appropriate political influence, educational opportunity, and economic opportunity. Everybody, that's why an awakening of the American people is what's necessary now. Not, just electing one woman to Congress isn't going to change all this. We need a movement. And I think part of what's been heard in this campaign is that I'll say to people, I'm not just asking you to wake up for a couple minutes and help me get elected. I'm asking that we all wake up and never go to sleep again.
So you think that's why people like Keith Ellison or some of the other folks, Alan Grayson, you think, I don't know a lot about the ins and outs of being a member of a party, but I do know that you get some flack, or you can get some flack if you endorse somebody who's not running on your party ticket. So I would assume they made a pretty conscious decision to do that. And why do you suppose that is?
Well, first of all, what you're saying is true, and I've learned more about that as time has gone on. You're right. For a sitting Democratic congressperson, which Alan Grayson is and which Keith Ellison is, for them to actually endorse officially an independent candidate, that was a big move. They knew that they would get flack, and they have. But they felt, according to them, that it was worth it. It was worth it because they honestly believed that by my being there, more change could be made. And in the words of Grayson, he said, I feel that many of the candidates have significant strengths. He said several of them do. But Marianne is the one I see making a real difference, and the only one I see making a real difference, he said. And he said, I'm very flattered by this, that he sees me becoming a national progressive leader, the likes of, he said, Elizabeth Warren or Dennis Kucinich, and I'm very proud of that. I'm a popularizer. This conversation can't just happen in Congress. The American people have to become engaged in this larger new conversation. And they know that I have an audience around the country. They know that I have a 30-year career. articulating and engaging people in a deeper, more authentic conversation than popular culture bombards us with on any given day. And they see, and I believe rightfully so, if I may say so myself, tremendous political and social potential here, that I could engage many people who are not considered likely voters in primary elections of a congressional campaign to truly be enrolled in this dialogue, and to see that politics should be a place where we are most conscious and most authentic and most sober and most mature. They see tremendous potential in that, and they're right. I mean, that's what this campaign has done. Something beautiful is going on here, and I'm very inspired by it, and I'm very moved by it. You know, I've seen throughout this district over the last 7 months how seriously people take their responsibility. They are interviewing the candidates, and they're doing their due diligence and listening and nodding their heads. When I talk about the second highest child poverty rate or the highest mass incarceration rate, when I talk about the fact that student loan debt now exceeds credit card debt, how these kids, we should be helping our young people get educated, not making it harder for them to get educated. How a child who doesn't go to preschool or have some kind of intellectual stimulation before the age of 5 starts kindergarten behind on day 1, and if we don't catch that child up within 2 years, that child is on a 50% probability track to incarceration. That an African American man has a 1 in 3 lifetime probability of incarceration in America today. All over this district, from Malibu down to Rancho Palos Verdes to Calabasas to Beverly Hills, people nod their heads and know this is wrong. This is morally intolerable. This is morally unacceptable. And it's a beautiful thing what happens when a room full of Americans wakes up to something. And what I know from my own career over a space of 30 years is when you change a conversation in Los Angeles, you have a national trend on your hands within 5 years. And we need a new political conversation. The old one is tired. The old one is just dominated by entrenched, calcified thought forms. It's like, who can even hear it again? And people in LA, we don't do same old here. We don't do same old in business. People don't live here because they want to hear the same old thing and toe the line with the way things have always been done. That's not what we do here. We don't do the same old in business. We don't do the same old in the arts. We don't do the same old in health and healing. And I think that what better place, what place could possibly be better than this area for initiating and presenting a political conversation that is far more real, far more expansive, and far more democratic than that which is just dominated by an oligarchy seeking to continue the trajectory by which more and more of our resources are siphoned into the hands of a very few, thus dismantling democracy as we know it.
I do have to confess to you, I think that's a great answer. I do have to confess to you, I heard you say we don't do same old in film, and at a rally, I was sitting next to a screenwriter friend, and I turned to him and I said, we are, however, a little attached to the outdated 3-act screenplay format. That aside, I don't think we do same old in this district. But having said that, you mentioned Elizabeth Warren, and I heard her speak recently too. She is very associated with what some people call populism, the new populism, the idea that there are viewpoints that are held by a majority of people, often in both parties, about whether it's Social Security or Medicare or income inequality or minimum wage or job creation, that there's this body of economic opinion. It seems you fall roughly within that framework. Is that fair to say?
In terms of externalized goals, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. But I'm reminded of a line from Martin Luther King when he said, we need a quantitative change in our circumstances and a qualitative change in our souls. He said that the desegregation of the American South was the externalized goal of the civil rights movement, but that the ultimate goal was the establishment of the beloved community. So when it comes to the externalized political issues, yes, I'm an Elizabeth Warren type. But I believe that our politics must return to the philosophical profundity that is at the heart of democracy. There's a larger conversation than just this group getting what they want or that group getting what they want. The larger conversation that has to do with our seeing ourselves as stewards of democracy. and recognizing that it's more about what our rights are. It's something even bigger. It's what our responsibilities are. And that should be part of our public discourse about politics. And I feel that I bring that as a unique added value.
Well, maybe you just answered one of my one of the questions I had been thinking of asking, which is I've heard you give what you would call externalities is a very populist message about child poverty and about all these issues to very wealthy audiences. And I think you even addressed it at one point, I'm not sure, but in effect saying the rich are, because of the 33rd district, they're a part of your constituency.
Yes.
And they have hopes, they have aspirations, they want to live meaningful lives and
That's
contribute
right.
too. So it was striking to me, obviously this was what sociologists would call a self-selected crowd. They came to a Marianne Williamson event. But it struck me that it did resonate, that this message, populism, for example, is sometimes defined as appealing to the will of what we'd call now the 99%, the economic majority, is sometimes in contradiction to the wealthy minority. But you see a unifying theme there between...
Yes.
Tell me about it.
Not every rich person is a greedy bastard, any more than every poor person is a lazy taker. These are just stereotypes. My conversation in this campaign is an American one. And I don't think any socioeconomic group has a monopoly on conscience or decency or nobility or concern or love for this country. Mine is not a transactional model where it's all about you getting yours. It's about all of us coming together, particularly at a time when democracy as we know it is in trouble, and sharing our views and sharing our ideas for how we might make things better. And I know from my career for the last 30 years, I have a career where things look kind of like an AA meeting. You have the mogul sitting next to the homeless person because you're talking at a level where it doesn't matter. And that's what I feel the new politics is. It's having a conversation that has nothing to do with your socioeconomics. It has to do with your citizenship. I don't care how old you are. I don't care how rich you are, how poor you are, what color you are, straight, gay, whatever. You're an American. And that's, to me, what the conversation needs to be. And yes, I have heard that here. I have felt heard here. Another issue is that, capitalism has been good to me. I have sold a few books. I have been very fortunate in my career as an author. So I understand the high side of capitalism. And I understand the high side of business. I understand righteous exchange. I'm the only one in this race who is myself an entrepreneur, excuse me. I do understand, and I think people get that I understand that. I get that if I create something of value, and you find that valuable to you, you give me $1, I give you the book. You walk away with more in the form of the book, and I walk away with more in the form of the $1. I know the high side of that, and that's to me in line with the laws of nature. And I think people know that in this district, and I'm not just talking some theory or conceptualization without on-the-ground entrepreneurial experience. What I am decrying is not that people can get rich in America. What I'm decrying is that too many people are falling into poverty in America through no fault of their own. We have seen develop over the last few decades a predatory strain of capitalism on a global scale. And so I believe that most people in America, even those who celebrate, as I do, capitalism when done from a socially responsible place, recognize that that's a problem. And that's not inherent in capitalism. I feel that. And I think people get that about me.
Last question. I'm going to break the rules of journalism a little bit to do it, because you told me something before we were interviewing, and I'm going to quote you. You said one of the most difficult things about being a politician is being a politician. If you were elected, and obviously you would first have to be one of the top 2 on June 3rd, which is when the election is, the primary election, and then, of course, prevail after that. If you go to Washington, what are your thoughts on how to be a politician in Washington without being a politician in Washington?
Well, what I meant by that, I said the worst part about being a politician is it turns you into a politician. And what I was referring to is that every conversation is about you. You know, as an author, I don't ask you, did you read my book? Do you know anybody who's reading my book? Are you going to come to my lectures? It's much easier to just be detached and like, my career isn't based on whether or not you read my book, but my career is kind of based on whether or not you and your friends are voting for me when you're doing a political campaign. I like to think, I might be kidding myself, I like to think once you're elected, that loosens up a bit, because at least for a while you're in. It's difficult to be unattached to result when you're running for office. You know, there's a phrase, fully invested in an effort, but not attached to the result. And I'm certainly trying to practice that here, but you know, you're spending other people's money, you've got other people's hopes, other people's trust, other people's yearnings for your country. So you have a responsibility, an ethical responsibility to do the best you can. And that does turn you into someone who probably talks about yourself and your project and your campaign more than you like to think of yourself as, you know, I like to think that I don't go into every situation talking about what I'm doing. But when you're running a political campaign, that's kind of hard.
Very good. Well, good luck on June 5th.
This is The Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the WeAct Radio Network in Washington, D.C., and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
Welcome back to the Zero Hour. In this hour, we will be talking with political strategist and Daily Beast columnist Cliff Schecter about the tragedy in UCSB at Santa Barbara. You know, every time there is a massacre, we have Cliff on to talk about gun control. We've had him on every couple of weeks. What does that tell you? We'll also be talking with Maverick Smith, who is the head of the Houston GLBT coalition, about the historic human rights ordinance just passed the city council there, protecting individual rights, including gender and GLBT rights. And we will be talking with Daniel Berger, Philadelphia lawyer, commentator, and member of the Patriotic Millionaires for Fiscal Strength. The 1% is getting organized and defending the interests of the 100%. So we have a great hour lined up for you, but I'll tell you, it breaks my heart that we're talking about gun massacres again. And what can we really say about the tragedy in Santa Barbara? Why are we still talking about this? You know, I debated a so-called Second Amendment advocate after the Newtown tragedy, and they really shouldn't be called that. They should be called people who can't parse the sentences in the Second Amendment because they think it says things it doesn't say. But I debated this guy, and he kept calling me anti-gun. You're anti-gun, you're anti-gun, which is not, in my personal history, the truth. I've used guns quite recently for recreation. I'm not anti-gun. So I said, I'm not anti-gun, I'm pro-kindergartner. Now look what's happened. Tragedy is now forcing me to say, and for everyone who's rational on this issue to say along with me, I'm not anti-gun, I'm pro-woman. I'm not anti-gun, I'm pro-college student. I'm not anti-gun, I'm pro-life in the purest sense of the term. What does that mean? It means that if any good is going to come out of this tragedy, it will have to be through the voice of a grieving father named Richard Martinez, who cried out last week, not one more. Not one more. There will be one more, of course, and there'll be one after that, and one after that, and one after that. In the meantime, we will talk and talk and talk and talk. But it's not time for talk anymore. It's time for action. Things look hopeless right now, but I'm not giving up, and you shouldn't either. At least we're having a conversation about gun control. And you know what else? At least we're finally having a conversation about the state of terror under which women live in our misogynistic and violent culture. You know, we make fun of third world countries for their attitudes towards women. At the same time, we ignore the epidemic of violence and fear which men have directed against women here in this country. You know, anthropologists have shown that some women in those countries like being veiled. Why wouldn't they like it if it keeps them from the kinds of lustful and objectifying eyes that men like Elliot Rodger and his many brothers turn on them in the pickup culture? Why do we glorify the sexualization and objectification of women in so many aspects of our culture when it leads to unrealistic expectations, frustration, and in far too many cases, violence? We have a lot to learn from these tragedies and about these tragedies. And of course, there's always a danger that we may ascribe the wrong causes to them or be too quick to jump on a bandwagon. But we know some things already. We know we need to get our guns under rational control, and we need to do it right away. We know that we need to learn that women are human beings. We need to learn that not just because it might prevent tragedies, but because it is a tragedy anytime a woman is dehumanized, and that happens millions of times every day. I'm not anti-gun. I'm pro-humanity. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. And we are back on The Zero Hour. With us is Cliff Schecter, political strategist and columnist for the Daily Beast, who has been a staunch fighter in the struggle against unregulated guns and the insanity of our gun culture and our gun economy. Cliff, it's always good to talk to you, but we always talk under tragic circumstances, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry we're talking so often under these circumstances, but thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me on. Yeah, even with that introduction, sadly, with one of these mass shootings happen every 2 weeks, we could talk much more often than we should have to. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and you've been, as usual, doing great writing and great coverage on the story of the UC Santa Barbara shootings, and you've been pointing the finger as much or more than even in the past at the NRA, and basically making the point that the NRA, the National Rifle Association, is enabling these You have a piece called "How the NRA Enables Massacres," and just tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Sure. Well, I mean, I do, and I guess part of it is as this goes on more and more, and we do nothing, it leads, I think, me to be more willing. In the past, I think I tried to be a little more, polite about it. I'm done with being polite. But also, I think that, when this shooting happened in Santa Barbara, there were some relevant things going on, which, maybe has now been pushed to the sidelines because of that, but we were having an argument at that moment over whether we were going to allow the Centers for Disease Control to do more studies, provide funding for them to do more studies on what causes the gun violence in this country, mass killings, and even just everyday shootings, to better understand how, as a public health issue, we can prevent these. We also were watching the NRA, and still are, try to block Vivek Murthy, from becoming Surgeon General, someone who has called gun violence a public health problem, which it is, because they don't want him to be able to honestly speak about it as a public health problem. So I saw the NRA sort of trying to suppress all this information, because information, much like with the tobacco companies and oil companies, information is their enemy. If objective information gets out there, they lose. So they manufacture doubt. They create their own fake studies. They try to obfuscate and turn it into a debate, into a partisan debate, as opposed to the vast majority of us are on one side and very few of you are on the other. And so that's what the context in which my piece on Santa Barbara was written, was that, here we have these things going on regularly. And the time it took me to write that piece after, it happened, you had a mass shooting in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. These things are happening one on top of the other, and here's this group that claims to actually care about people, claims to be a civil rights organization, which is laughable, that is doing everything in their power to try to make sure that people cannot openly share information on what is causing gun violence. I mean, and that extends to our law enforcement, where they pass these T-Hart amendments every year so that the ATF can't share any gun crime gun trace statistics on where, gun crimes are with local police departments and other federal agencies. It extends to Florida, where Rick Scott signed a bill where pediatricians could not even tell their patients that having a gun in the house put you at greater risk. Thankfully, that was thrown out by the courts. And so that was the context that I put this in, that they don't care, clearly. That if people get the information they need so that they are not shot.
Well, and going back to the issue of just pediatricians alone, for example, if I recall correctly, there have also been proposals, or in fact, it's already become law. It may have been written into the Affordable Care Act to say that pediatricians or doctors in general, cannot ask if there's a gun in the house.
Yeah, which is insane. Which I'm going to guess. I think you're right about that. If I understand it correctly, and my guess is that I'll get hopefully tossed out by a court on First Amendment grounds too. But it's amazing, right? These fighters for liberty and justice in the American way, who believe in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, are just all too happy to suppress the First Amendment rights of those who would warn others about the dangers of having a weapon whose only purpose is to kill in your house. And again, we're talking about you and me here. We're talking about you, somebody who grew up shooting guns. We're talking about me, somebody who spent summers up in New Hampshire shooting competitively. We're not talking about people that have never handled guns and don't understand them. Not that we need to. We know how to read, but okay, that's the sort of, another red herring the NRA would throw out. Well, you and I both have experience with guns, and I think that makes us appreciate that much more what they can do. And, so if people are not allowed to share that information, not allowed to know that, you're not doing your job, especially if you're a doctor and it's not their fault, but you're not allowed to warn your patients. You're not allowed to do your job. And how does the NRA have the right to be anywhere close to somebody's doctor's office? It's insane.
Well, and I guess what this gets to for me is that you mentioned they describe it as a civil rights issue, although there's no civil right on earth, no human right that's allowed to infringe on the rights of others, and this is the ultimate. Death is the ultimate infringement of the rights of another human being. So I guess what I have to ask about, we know that politicians are craven on this issue. Excuse me, we know that the NRA is very aggressive on this issue. But my question for you is, do we understand the psychology, how our culture became so warped that actually a Joe the plumber can say, my right to carry a gun trumps your dead kids, whatever the exact quote was, literally saying to the grieving parents of young people in Santa Barbara and Isla Vista that my right to carry a gun is more important than your kids being dead. How did we become so freaking insane?
Yeah, that is a great point. And, I've written about this too, which is, language, like many other things, how we behave, culture overall is viral, right? It's something where a couple people that maybe are very much in public view, whether it's musicians or whether it's actors or it's people in politics, but, our culture changes slowly, so much so that you often don't even notice about what's going on, and around it. And clearly, we're, besides the easy access to guns, and I guess also obviously I'm not sure what the answer to this is in a society with such a free press, except for maybe equal time, which we used to have, and another of many things that Ronald Reagan got rid of that helped this country.
Bill Clinton helped too on that one.
Yes, he did. You're right, and we should give bad credit where bad credit's due with the 1996 Telecommunications Act. So right. You are correct. Fox News on a daily basis talking about things like Benghazi and questioning whether the president was born here, playing to really the worst, beyond just politics, but a base sort of sociological fear of downscale white males in this country. And there's nothing to equal it out. If these people are listening to Rush Limbaugh all day and they're watching Fox and whatever, and they're getting a constant stream of, why you have your problems you have, here's who's to blame for it. It's that slutty woman. It's her fault. It's those gays who are changing things. It's those blacks that just want your money. It's on and on and on. And I think they've debased us to the point where we used to sort of see it as we're all in it together. That we had a public commons. That's what this country was created around. And they have turned us much more into people where we're all in it for ourselves, and everybody else is just trying to take what we have. And I think that's a part of it, because if you're someone who also, by the way, doesn't have access to treatment, because Ronald Reagan also destroyed our mental health system, and others have since then too, Democrats and Republicans, so you're not being treated properly. You already are having sort of these feelings, this anger, maybe having mental health issues. You're sitting at home watching Fox and listening to Rush Limbaugh, and all you have to do is go around the corner without a background check to get a gun. That's a pretty lethal mix.
Well, and I think that's a great point, and it amazes me that I've actually, the one time I've been denied publication on the most popular website I write for, was when I've pointed out, for example, that the killer in Knoxville, who shot up a Unitarian church, killed 2 people and wounded a number of others, had Sean Hannity's book on his shelf, had Bill O'Reilly's book on his shelf, had the 100 people who were destroying America, and said he was going to go down Bernie Goldberg's list one by one. That you're not allowed to say that maybe, just maybe, if you tell a struggling group of people, lower middle class white people are economically struggling, that's authentic. If you tell them that the source of their troubles are these evil people, and they go out and shoot a few, that you're not even allowed to mention, hey, does that happen?
These guys are inciting riot.
Right. And to me, this is, and I wrote a piece called Death of an Ordinary House Cat, after they murdered the house cat belonging to the children of a Democrat in the Deep South, a Democratic political candidate, and carved liberal on the side of the cat, the word liberal, and left it on the doorstep for the children to find. And it's the same thing. It's the same rage. It's the same hatred.
And it's a sickness where they say they develop this hatred for liberals, who are coming after them and doing this, that, and the other thing. And they're being told this, as you point out, by these books, by these TV stations. Those liberals want to do this and that, and it's to the people. They're demonizing people, and they're doing it for their ratings. They're doing it to sell guns, whatever it is their interest is. But they're never held accountable for the real life results. You pointed out the case in Knoxville. There was Richard Poplowski in Pittsburgh who shot 3 police officers. Why? Because they were coming to his house to serve a warrant, but he said he thought they were coming from Obama to get his guns. Where did he hear that? There was the shooter who headed towards the Tides Foundation in Northern California. Why was he heading there to shoot them? Because Glenn Beck had told him they were anti-capitalist and they were going to ruin America. And when he got in a shootout with the police on the highway, this isn't like a unique event. This is a constant, and somehow we're supposed to just ignore all that. And as I said, I'm very much a believer in free speech, but certainly there is a point where when you're out and out lying, we do have libel and slander laws, all right? We do have laws against yelling fire in a crowded theater and inciting riot. I don't know the answer. I'm not going to say it's that simple, but clearly we've got people that are encouraging those who aren't getting the help they need and have way too easy access to guns to go out and do things. And I'm not claiming in all cases, because obviously there's some cases that have nothing to do with politics, but there's but there are plenty of others that do.
And people will say, for example, gun nuts. I used to avoid the phrase gun nuts, but I can't anymore. Will say in this case, but Elliot Rodger in Isla Vista was none of the things you describe. He wasn't lower middle class. He wasn't but my point and your point is that we're talking about the NRA. We're talking about the politicians who support the NRA. We're talking about the pundits who accelerate. They're all part of this. And look, the lower middle class white male is struggling. There are forces against him. And I wish the Democrats and progressives were doing a better job of saying, no, this is what's really happening to you. You should be joining hands with black people, with Jewish people, with gay people, with, but it's all about, there's creating the idea that there's a world of ever dwindling resources, including sex, by the way, and that if I don't get mine, somebody's going to pay. And it's a big problem. We're not going to solve it today, Cliff Schecter, but I will say that the one thing we can solve today, if our politicians get the brass and the political will, is we can get these guns under control.
We definitely can. And look, it's a very small step, but last night the NRA couldn't stand in the way and backed off of blocking a bill that passed the House with a decent number of Republicans supporting it, that put a lot more money into the instant background check system, which isn't functioning up to what it can be. Some states don't have enough funds to do this, and the NRA, because they're always blaming mental health and always saying, well, we don't even share all the records. They kind of would have looked stupid if they had blocked that, even though, of course, that's just rhetoric from them. But that was a step forward. Many different states are passing these bills keeping guns away from domestic abusers, which is something the NRA blocked in the past and realized they can no longer block. They've gotten out of the way of that. Other groups are boycotting places like Starbucks and Chipotle until they change their laws, which they have. They say, we don't need people bringing in open carry assault weapons while you're trying to eat your burger or your burrito or have your coffee. And so, change is slow. It's not what we want it to be, but I do see some things turning around. I'm hopeful. The problem is, in the meantime, there are going to be more Santa Barbaras.
Well, and you made a great point this week, and we'll close on this, that these mass shootings are only 1% of the gun deaths in this country. So for every victim's name you read in the paper, there are 99 standing behind her or him like shadows who you may never read about. And where can people go to learn more about this issue and maybe get involved?
You can go to the Everytown, which is a new group of a combination of Moms Demand Action and Bears Against Illegal Guns. There's a National Gun Victims Action Council. You can also, the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. There's a number of terrific groups that you can just punch into your Google. You'll get the best sites, and you can learn more and see what you can do, because this is a problem that's only getting worse, and it's something, as you pointed out, we can solve. We know how to solve it. We've seen every other high-income country, developed country comparable to us, solve this problem. So we can do it too.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for being a great fighter and a great advocate on this cause. Cliff Schecter, columnist for the Daily Beast, political strategist. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, RJ.
You are listening to the We Act Radio Network. Thanks for having us here.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. Joining us now is Daniel Berger. Daniel Berger is a Philadelphia lawyer and a commentator and writer on economic and social policy issues. He has appeared on a lot of cable news shows, including Ed Schultz and Fox Business News. Hey, I've been there, done that. And speaks out a lot on behalf of the Patriotic Millionaires Group. And the Patriotic Millionaires Group is jumping into the economic conversation again. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, it's great to be here.
Now, I gather you've also done well for yourself and want to give back. At least that's the theme of the group. I believe the full name of the group is Patriotic Millionaires for Fiscal Strength. Is that right?
That's correct. The group was established, I believe, in 2011. It's got about 200 members. We're affluent. We're members of the 1%, but we're not in the 1/100th or 1/1000th of 1%. So we don't represent the oligarchs, the oligarchy in this country, but we're people who are extremely affluent, have done well, and we were brought together on an ad hoc basis in 2011 in response to the so-called fiscal emergency that was being ballyhooed about at that time. And we made the dramatic, if not revolutionary, proposal that we would be willing to accept slightly higher taxes in order to address the fiscal issues that were much talked about at that point.
So you are not advocates of what Daniel Moynihan called enlightened self-interest, or you see your self-interest in broader terms than merely the amount of taxes you're paying. So, tell us about that.
Yeah, we saw ourselves, this is really an exercise in enlightened self-interest because, and it's funny because the wealthy, which is a tiny sliver of the population, have the most to lose from a catastrophic disruption of the economy or of U.S. society. And, so we think it's very short-sighted what what most wealthy people do. And by the way, I must say that there are a lot of people like us who are very affluent, including, I would say, 10 to 15% of the oligarchy, are progressive in their outlook. So I don't want to give you the impression that, that we were, that we're a bunch of lone voices in the night. It's just that, the vast majority of extremely wealthy people, particularly in the oligarchy, have the public spotlight, and unfortunately are very self-interested and short-sighted, and their politics are very reactionary.
Well, what worries me about all of this, Daniel, is that about the pattern you're describing is that it contributes to a fractioning of our society where, I think the 99%, the 1%, it's a great framing for people to understand, and I endorse it, but what people also don't understand is implicit in what you said is that even within the 1%, there's a 99 and a 1%. There are people, and that even within that 0.1%, there are people who want to do the right thing because they're good human beings, they're Americans, they happen to be very either lucky in their genetics and where they were born, or lucky in their gifts and in their passion for what they like to do in life, or well compensated for it. So, all of it tends to, and then we've got, anytime someone wants to address these inequality issues, we've got people who come back and say, well, that's class warfare. Well, class warfare has been going on for a long time, right?
Well, let me add one thing to what you said. It's not just that we're altruistic and others are selfish, although that is true. It's that we believe in the scientific worldview, and we're well-informed, well-educated, reasonably well-informed, and we believe that there's something called a progression of ideas in the history of ideas, where new ideas, new and more true ideas, replace older and falsified ideas, and this is particularly true in the modern period. And we know that, look, the country is facing it's in a decline, a steep decline, and the decline is being driven by underlying factors, structural factors, which, if they're not addressed, the decline is going to become irreversible. And some of these factors, such as the instability of the financial system, the concentration of wealth in the hands of the few, have the potential of causing a catastrophic disruption of either the economy or society, which would be in nobody's interest. So we understand that, and that's the reason why we take the positions that we do. And the tax issue on the fiscal, the so-called fiscal emergency, which, by the way, proved to be largely exaggerated and hyped, and certainly was much less important than the crisis of unemployment that existed as a result of the financial crisis and the ensuing economic downturn, has sort of bled over into the larger issue of concentration of wealth in the hands of the few and economic inequality.
And this, well, I think there's no question, and that gets back to the enlightened self-interest and overall stability of the society that we all continue to live in and expect to live in for the foreseeable future. So you guys are sponsoring an event in Boston this weekend with Thomas Piketty and Elizabeth Warren. Interesting combination. Theoretician and the person who puts thought into action, although she's a theoretician herself. What's the thinking there in teaming up Piketty and Warren?
Well, I think that you have the two leading spokesmen for their respective fields. In Warren's case, it's the fields of politics and public policy, and in Piketty's case, it's economic research and public policy. So that they are an excellent complement. and both of them have just recently written books. I think Pickety's has the potential. It's been a blockbuster. It's a bestseller. It has potential of being, one of the most popular books of all time, seemingly. And Warren's is more about the struggles of the middle class, and from a policy standpoint and political standpoint, what can be done about it. So I think it is a perfect combination. I must say this about Pickety's book. It is very broad in its ambitions. It's called Capital in the 21st Century, and the reference to capital is not by accident. And to might say the grandfather of all books on capitalism, which was written by Karl Marx, called Das Kapital. So this is really, Pickety's book is really Das Kapital in the 21st century.
Right, and he is taking a broad. By the way, I've reviewed it. I read it. It's very readable. I recommend it to people in all walks of life. He's very eclectic in his thinking. I think he and Warren are a great pairing, and I commend you guys for doing it. I'll just close with this. I have a friend who went over to Davos to consult with the 0.001%.
Right.
And I said, how are those guys doing? How are those guys feeling about the world situation? He said, scared. So, which is, because they've got information. And so I guess, are you optimistic? Are you worried? Are you both?
I am.
To wrap up,
I am
your
concerned.
Thoughts?
I am concerned because of what I said before. The U.S. and the advanced economies in the West are in a decline, and the decline is being driven by underlying structural features, mainly having to do with the economy. A principal one of which is the increasing and growing and dangerous levels of economic inequality, and that unless these issues are addressed, the decline will become irreversible. And at the same time, some of these factors, like financial instability, economic inequality, climate change, global warming, have the potential of, causing an acute catastrophic disruption of the economy or society. And these things can be addressed. We know how to address it. We've gone through this before. We've already had, the Depression 1.0, and, we practically had the Great Depression 2.0. We know...
And we still could, and unfortunately we'll have to leave it there, but I couldn't agree with you more. Those reasons are why we call this show the Zero Hour. So it's time to act. Daniel Berger, attorney, commentator, patriotic millionaire, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and we will be right back on the Zero Hour. And we are back on the Zero Hour. I am reading from Think Progress, the website Think Progress, who tells us that an equal rights ordinance has passed in Houston, Texas, and it guarantees the rights of all persons against discrimination, including gender discrimination and LGBT discrimination. With us now is Maverick Welsh, who is president of the Houston LGBT Caucus, real estate agent by day, it says, city council candidate, and LGBT organizer by night. We live by night here at the Zero Hour. Maverick Welsh, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So you guys in Houston, the city council down there passed a pretty impressive ordinance, I would say. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time in Houston. The organization I'm the president of, the Houston GLBT Political Caucus, was founded almost 40 years ago to fight for this exact type of ordinance. This has been an ongoing issue with the GLBT community in Houston. We've been fighting for this kind of ordinance for a really long time. So it's just a great time for Houston. I think it's about time that we, get an ordinance like this so that we can continue competing for the best and brightest talent around the country.
Well, I think that's a great point, that economically it's great for the city, as well as just on a human level, the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Now, let me just ask you a question. How long ago was it that people thought this cause and this ordinance was a hopeless ambition? Because I'll bet they did.
Well, Houston is a strong mayor system, which means only the mayor has the power to place an item on the city council agenda. Luckily for us, we've worked really hard and elected a great mayor, Anise Parker, a member of the GLBT community and actually former president of the Houston GLBT political caucus. And Mayor Parker, being the mayor, had committed to us to put this ordinance on the agenda, and sure enough, she kept her promise and did so. And now we've got an ordinance. So it hasn't always been easy in Houston because we've got a strong mayor system. So we had to elect the right mayor, which we did, and now we've got an ordinance.
Now, and not only did this pass, but it wasn't a squeaker. I mean, I think the vote was 11-6, something like that, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, you're right. Almost 2-1.
Now, as your city council, I should know this, but I don't. Are the membership elected at large, or do they represent different areas of the city?
It's actually both. So the city council split into 11 districts, and then there are 5 at-large seats. So it's kind of a little bit different than what most other cities do. And our at-large council members typically focus on bigger issues, and district council members typically focus on specific issues to the neighborhoods they represent. So it's an interesting system, but overwhelmingly our council members supported this, and I think it was the right thing to do, and I think many of them agreed.
So where do you think this puts Houston in terms of ordinances of this kind on a kind of spectrum of American cities from most enlightened to least enlightened? Where would you put Houston if most enlightened is at 10?
Well, I think it puts Houston right up at a 10. I think it's taken us a while, and part of the reason is just because you've got to have a mayor that will introduce this type of ordinance. But now Houston, I think, joins all the other progressive cities and large cities in the United States with this kind of protection. And I think it puts us squarely in the progressive camp, an enlightened camp.
Now, has there been any backlash from more conservative members of the community? Has there been a lot of controversy about this ordinance, or people just kind of saying, well, that's pretty much the way it is, and let's get on with our lives?
There's been a little bit of controversy, but when we counted the number of speakers that were speaking out to council, and it was well over 300 people speaking in favor of it, and probably 60-something opposed. And the number of people that were coming and speaking in opposition to this just shrank and shrank and shrank as we had more public hearings on it. I wouldn't, Houston has a very low threshold for referendums, so I wouldn't be surprised if they get 17,000 signatures. That's all they really need to force a referendum on this. But I'm very confident that even if this ordinance does go to a referendum, I have no doubt that the voters of Houston will side with equality. I mean, the Houston voters have elected Anise Parker. They elected her 3 times as an at-large council member. They elected her 3 times as city controller, and they've elected her 3 times as mayor. I think this is a very progressive city, and I'm very confident that if this goes to a referendum, that most of the voters of Houston and overwhelmingly will agree with this ordinance. It really protects everybody. It's not just a GLBT ordinance. It protects many, many different classes and groups of people. And I think that's important because it really protects large numbers of people in the community and offers local protections against discrimination.
Well, and that speaks to coalition building, which is a big key to success. And last question, given you obviously have a somewhat unique governance system there in Houston, but what are the lessons other cities and and other organizers can take from this great success down in Houston?
Here's what I think the biggest takeaway is. We need to be able to reach out to different groups and to the business community. One thing I want to say is that we worked really closely with Bob Harvey and the Greater Houston Partnership, which is kind of like Houston's version of the Chamber of Commerce. And we had business community support. Houston is a very welcoming city. And, people that are in business realize that you want to attract the best and brightest talent possible. And so they know that an ordinance like this is just good for business. Many businesses in Houston already have these types of protections in place, but by putting them in place to protect people throughout the entire city, it makes Houston a much more attractive place for talent to come. And so I would tell organizers across the country, reach out to the business community. Don't make an assumption that they're opposed to this type of ordinance as well. I think the business community can be a great partner, and I think it'll make all the difference in the world. I'm a small business owner myself, so it becomes natural for me to think in terms of business. And it's a competition out there. Houston's competing against other cities. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to work, own a business. It's one of the great cities of the United States, and I think now it's even better. So, it's a great time to be a Houstonian.
Well, that's great advice, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. Maverick Welsh, president of the Houston GLBT Caucus and city council candidate, real estate agent. Thanks so much for joining us on the Zero Hour.
Thank you so much. Anytime. And come to Houston.
You bet. I will. I'll take you up on that. It's a deal. All right. We'll be right back after this. I'm Richard Eskow, and this is The Zero. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much.